Silent Screams brings you a tale that will haunt your thoughts long after the final word. This is not just any story, but a first-hand recount of an encounter with the supernatural set in the heart of city name. Settle in, turn the lights down low, and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. It was a dreary evening, the kind where the sky turned a sickly gray, bruised with the threat of rain but unwilling to break. The air was heavy, laced with the crisp scent of impending storms and something else, something sour, almost metallic. The house on Maple Street stood tall and weary, its once grand Victorian facade now cracked with age. Ivy climbed up the walls like green veins, and the windows, dusty and cracked, stared out at the world like blind eyes. From the outside, it was just an old house, forgotten by the city's relentless march toward modernity. But inside, it was a prison of whispers and flickering shadows. The couple, Emma and Jack, moved in on a whim. It was meant to be a fresh start, away from the chaos of their city lives and into a quieter space where they could breathe, rebuild, and perhaps rediscover what had once made them inseparable. They had spent their first few nights unpacking, joking about the creaks and groans of the old wood as they worked late into the night. But tonight was different. Tonight, the silence of the house seemed thicker, pressing against their skin and filling their lungs with an unshakable sense of unease. Emma stood in the kitchen, staring absently out the window. The backyard was barely visible, a tangle of dark branches that clawed at the sky like bony fingers. She rubbed her arms, shivering despite the warmth in the room. "Hey, did you hear that?" Jack's voice echoed from the living room. It sounded calm, but Emma knew him well enough to catch the tension threaded through it. She turned, eyes wide with a question she couldn't quite voice. A faint tap, tap, tap skittered down the hallway behind her, so soft. It could have been mistaken for the rattling of tree branches against the side of the house. But there were no trees close enough to touch the walls. "No," she whispered, more to herself than as an answer. Her throat tightened as the sound came again, louder this time, as if whatever it was had gained the confidence to announce its presence. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Emma swallowed, her mind racing through the logical explanations. Old pipes? The wind. But deep down, she knew that none of those explanations would make sense of the chill that seeped into her bones. She took a step forward, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The hallway stretched ahead, bathed in a dim glow from the single bulb above, which flickered like a dying heartbeat. She reached for her phone on the counter, but as she turned, the air grew colder still, biting at her fingertips. The faint outline of breath puffed out before her, visible in the chill. Emma's eyes darted around the room, searching for the source, and that's when she saw it, a shadow deeper than the rest, standing at the end of the hallway. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It was just there, an impossibility given life in the flickering half-darkness. "Jack," she called out, her voice trembling. No response. Only the sound of her own rapid heartbeat thrumming in her ears. The shadow began to shift, a slow, deliberate glide across the wall as if testing its boundaries. Emma's eyes followed it, unable to look away as the dark shape morphed into something more defined, tall, slender, with limbs that seemed unnaturally long. It stopped, turned, and though it had no eyes, she felt its gaze pierce through her. A sudden crash from upstairs broke her trance. She flinched, the spell of fear snapping just enough for her to move. Her heart lurched as she ran toward the living room. Jack was nowhere to be seen, but the old grandfather clock in the corner began to chime erratically, the hands spinning wildly. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps as the sound echoed louder, until it felt like the walls themselves were shouting at her. The room pulsed, alive with an energy she could only describe as malevolent. Emma took a step back and stumbled, her hands scraping against the splintered floorboards. Her eyes caught a movement in a reflection of the cracked mirror above the mantel. At first, it was just a ripple, like a drop in a pond. Then slowly, a face began to press through the glass, a face so pale it seemed almost translucent, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. Emma blinked, and the face was gone. But when she looked around, she realized the room was no longer empty. At the edge of her vision stood a woman, or rather, the ghost of one. Her dress was tattered gray, as if soaked in the years that had passed since she last wore it. Hair hung in matted clumps over her face, which seemed to shimmer in and out of focus, like an image on an old television screen struggling for clarity. The room grew colder still, and Emma watched in paralyzed terror as the figure moved, its feet gliding an inch above the floor. It raised an arm, a single bony finger pointed directly at her. Emma felt rooted to the spot, her legs unwilling to obey the commands of her screaming brain. The apparition's mouth opened, and though no sound came out, Emma heard it in her mind, a piercing, endless wail that burrowed deep into her ears and refused to let go. Her vision swam with dark spots, the room fading in and out as the ghost stepped closer. Suddenly, the light sputtered, casting erratic, desperate shadows against the walls. Emma's eyes darted to the window. Outside, the storm had finally broken, and sheets of rain lashed against the glass. A jagged streak of lightning split the sky, illuminating the figure before her in a burst of blue-white light. She could see it now, fully formed, a face contorted with rage and sorrow, eyes hollow but locked onto hers within, intensity that stole her breath. Emma's mouth opened to scream, but all that came out was a strangled croak. The figure tilted its head, and the corners of its mouth curled into a grotesque semblance of a smile. Emma's knees buckled, sending her crashing to the floor. The air crackled around her, and the pounding of footsteps thundered down the hallway. Her heart leapt as Jack appeared, wild-eyed and breathless. "What the hell is going on?" His voice shattered the suffocating silence, but the figure didn't waver. It turned its gaze from Emma to Jack, its expression unreadable. The lights dimmed, and the air thickened with the smell of wet earth and something older, more decayed. The ghost flickered, the outline of its form trembling as if straining to stay solid. Emma scrambled to her feet, grabbing Jack's arm with a grip so tight her knuckles turned white. Before they could react, the figure lunged forward, faster than either of them could have expected. It passed through Emma, a wave of numbing cold that sucked the breath from her lungs and sent her world spinning into darkness. Emma's vision blurred, and the last thing she heard was the distant sound of the grandfather clock chiming, slow and deliberate, as if counting down to something unseen. The last note hung in the air, heavy and final, as everything around her fell silent once more.